We thank Roy for joining us. He is going to give you a presentation on American Chestnut Tree, which is used to be a really important tree in North American forests. Grew to massive sizes and was a big generator of economic wealth in terms of lumber used for furniture. And also he's going to be talking about other trees that are under threat in U.S. forests and in general how the forests are doing. Roy is a 1970 graduate of what is now the SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry, and also of Syracuse University. He has a wealth of experience regarding forests, including logging research, helicopter logging, working as district-wide county forester in Florida in the Division of Forestry for 6 counties. He was an assistant ranger for the U.S. Forest Service in the Cherokee National Forest in Tennessee, as well as Kisatchie National Forest in Louisiana. While in the U.S. Forest Service, he managed the Gee Creek Wilderness Area, helping to construct part of the John Muir National Recreational Trail. He did some writing of compartment forest management prescriptions, managed reforestation operations, managed youth and senior citizens conservation projects. He became a firefighting crew boss and prescribed fire manager, and also managed a variety of recreation areas. He then returned to Central New York, where he really wanted to be, and he has worked here for 11 years as lead forester for Pomeroy Lumber. He recently has been working as a consulting forester and volunteered as District 7 Director for the New York chapter of the American Chestnut Foundation, helping to develop blight-resistant species. He is now transitioning to retirement. So congratulations to Roy on all his good efforts and on transitioning to retirement. So with that, please welcome Roy Hopke. Again, thank you, Roy. Go ahead.
Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate that you have asked me to give a presentation here. And I'll start with this slide about the New York chapter of the American Chestnut Foundation. One of the reasons why I like to talk about this is not only because of the work they did in the with the chestnuts, but it's a complete volunteer organization. We have no paid employees, never did. Not the New York chapter. The national does, but it's a good model for a nonprofit in that they never had any employees, and it was all volunteer. And what we do, we've done a lot of different things, but on this little slide, it says in partnership with SUNY ESF on the bottom. And what we have done over the years is we have raised, some years were more lean than others. It would be $100,000, $200,000. We'd put the touch on another foundation or wealthy person, and we got these funds. And then what we do is we would fund ESF in their research in the early years. And we did get some state funds one time. We got a $500,000 grant, which was spread over 3 years, and which really helped a lot. And recently we got a much bigger backer, and the research is really moving fast. All kinds of research on trying to return the chestnut to the forest, more on improving the tree, all kinds of things. The individual chapters worked largely in creating these seed orchards. What I'm going to do is I'm going to this is going to be a really willy-nilly, lousy, disorganized stream of consciousness type of presentation. So I hope people can ask questions at the end, because I'm not going to get it completely thorough. And I'm retired now, or I'm trying desperately to retire, and I'm doing less, but for actually the bulk of the time that I've been in New York, I've been a consulting forester since 1996. So, and there's some of the things that I've done is work with forest management planning for the state on their 480A program. They get a tax break for being in that program, and they have to maintain forestry standards. I throw this in, ran a couple articles, but this one was actually in the Sierra Atlantic in 2003. And Hal Smith, who used to run Southern Tier Earth Times, is that still around? I wonder. Hal was a professional writer, and he took my raw copy and he made an article for the Sierra Atlantic. I had the feeling he was associated with it. Before I go any further, I did say already that I've been in Mary Cronk's debt for helping me with this, because I'm so uncouth and unlearned in this particular Zoom situation, which I never had to use before. But I also want to mention my wife, and this is my wife about 50 years ago when I worked in the logging industry. And this is her today, this last spring.
No.
Oh, I got the wrong one. I got the wrong one. Let's see here. Oh yeah, here it is. I got to show you this. Last spring, I slipped on the ice out in the woods and I broke my shoulder. So whereas usually I carry my paint gun in my right hand and my notebook in my left when I'm marking timber, I had only one hand. So guess who became the assistant timber marker? This is Lou Ann in a Pioneer Cemetery over in Sanford. And that's the paint gun she's got in her hand. So I had to mention that about my wife. I have a lot to be thankful for, to have her. Now, of course, you mentioned, these chestnut trees, particularly in the Mid-South, persisted, within living people's lifetimes. Things were gigantic. And they called them the redwoods of the East. Of course, it was a big cultural thing, the chestnuts. Of course, they logged them too, but a lot of these mountain people that had these upland farms, they never really saw much cash back in the day. But they were selling chestnuts for $1 a bushel, which is in a lot of cases, that was all the money they received that year. Huge trees. I mentioned the nuts. This is what a burr looks like. Probably a lot of you have seen these in the past if you spent a lot of time in the forest, because a lot of the local woodlots that have been heavily cut, get some chestnuts coming up through. You'd never even know they were there. They're like in suspended animation in the ground. And then if you have a heavy cutting operation, these small trees come up, and some of them actually produce these nuts. And they are delicious. And as far as I'm concerned, I've eaten the Chinese ones and the Japanese ones, to me, these are the sweetest and the best. And so they were quite important, just for the nuts and the wild, and everything in the woods ate them. I don't know. I'm just going by logic. But when the trees disappeared, is it any mystery that a lot of the wildlife disappeared with it? You know, in 1904, they started getting this disease, and the trees started to disappear at a fairly rapid rate. Now, this is a coaster that somebody made out of a dead tree, and I put the penny in the bottom there so you could get some idea of how they were growing. And at the bottom where I have this red arrow here, this is when the tree was first infected with chestnut blight, and it tried to overcome it, where I've got the cursor right now on both sides, and cover it up. But it was unsuccessful, and then the next infection was much worse and went all the way around. And what it does is it destroys the connective tissue in the tree, so it can't get water or nutrients from the ground. But importantly, you can get some idea of the growth. Now, I read somewhere that the chestnut's a slow growing tree. Not what I've seen. I've cut some recently killed trees down, and every single one of them have these huge rings. This is an annual growth ring. And I collect forestry books and about wildlife and so forth, just like a typical forester does. And I have some early accounts where, like, people were going into their private woodlot on a 10-year rotation. And they did that because the trees would grow so fast that if you thinned them out, they grow so fast that you go back next time and cut what would be a premium tree. Here's an example. A 12-inch tree and 12 inches in diameter at chest height will have about 30 board feet in it. If that same tree grows to 17 inches in 10 years, and you can see by these rings and like I said, the penny down here, it's very likely that a lot of those trees could hit 17 or 18 inches. And at that time, the tree would have gotten from 30 board feet to either 180 on average for the 17-inch tree, or over 200 for the 18-inch tree. So you can see that it was a magnificent grower, as far as I can see, and what I've seen about the physiology of the tree and how it grows fast. Now, this is a piece of oak furniture that I have, and I included it in the presentation because if you go to the local antique auctions or buy antiques, a lot of the furniture that's labeled oak is really not. One way you can tell is by these are phloem rake parenchyma rays, which come from the very center of the tree and go outward to the outside of the tree in very thin sheets of material. And they're alive, whereas most of the wood that's laid down is dead. But these so-called rays, stay alive through the life of the tree. And all hardwoods have them, but on oak, you can really see them well. If this is a saw cut into the center of the tree, you'll get a lot of these rays that show up. You know, here's some more of them up here. This is what a chestnut would look like. And it has rays, but they're just not big like this oak is. And it is a really good cabinet wood. And like the last house I had was constructed in the 20s and had a lot of chestnut woodwork on the inside of the house, around the door frames, chestnut windows, tremendously rot resistant. I still see these fence posts out in the woods. Sometimes, you know, you see this where they used to be. And what they would do is they would plant the fence post ends where they're brought together like this on top of a rock. Keeps them out of the moisture, and they would be there for a long time. And sometimes you can still see that. Now, about the chestnut locally, I showed Mary. This is Shenango Valley State Park. And 20-something years ago, somebody that worked there showed me this tree as on Oak Island. And it was bearing, but it was only one tree. And in order to successfully create fertile nuts, there has to be two trees, because they don't like to fertilize themselves. The male and the female flowers are on the tree, but very rarely do they produce a nut that can make a seedling. And they're like inbred. And if you can get a seedling out of it, it just doesn't grow very well. Well, I was showing Mary, and this is how we became acquainted, that there was a tree. This is the golf course down here. Can you see it on the photo? And this is Lily Lake up here. And these dotted lines are the roads or trails that go around. And this is just down from the end of the big lake. If you walk along this trail, you got a chestnut tree there right now that's bearing, that's about 13 inches in diameter. But it can't make any, this tree here on the bottom, this one died and sprouted back, but it's not big enough to get the pollen all the way up here. If it's making any pollen, I don't know. But this also illustrates the use for the state parks. You know, you're gonna get some of these trees, and you're gonna get some that are gonna pop up where, you know, you wouldn't even know that they would be.
What state park was that in?
Shenango Valley.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. This is one of the trees we planted at the Rogers Environmental Center plantation, which our district has been in charge of this. The DEC and the Rogers let us use this piece of land to grow chestnuts. And I was thrilled to get the opportunity to use this for the chestnuts. And I guess they are too, because the DEC put up a sign there that explains the plantation. It's across the street and up on top of Cush Hill. We've been working on there since 1993. So this, where I'm circling this thing is the canker. This is the blight fungus canker right here. And this is a wire fence we put to protect the tree from deer. This is another photo, and it shows these little orangey, actually these are the fruiting bodies from the fungus. And another tree that is in our plantation. And the canker kills the tissue, and it gradually encircles the tree, and cuts it off from its roots, and then it starts to die back. There's a lot of weird things about chestnuts. One of the weird things about chestnuts is the blight fungus cannot follow the tree down into its roots because it's not a good environment for the blight fungus to grow in the soil. And also there are other organisms there that secrete substances and keep it from growing. So that what we've been kind of blessed in that we got them top killed, but they're still alive underground. And like I said, they're like in suspended animation for years, for decades. You wouldn't even know they're there. A lot of these woodlots, they are predominantly oak, might have a little bit of red, mostly red oak, some white oak, some ash. You can't see a chestnut in there. But when they really clean it out and the sun starts getting down there, these trees start coming up from their roots, and they're really antique trees. And we don't know how long they're going to last under the ground like that without any top growth to feed them. Now, some things have been said about, the bigger picture about how many trees are we going to lose because of foreign insects and disease. And this is your gypsy moth, which attacks mostly, just an example of red oaks. And, before the logging business got so large, after say the 70s and the 80s here in the Southern Tier, where you had these fully stocked, 85% red oak stands that were the host for these gypsy moths, they just ran amok because it was all the food for them in these 85% red oak and white oak stands that the gypsy moths eat the leaves right off. Now, after years of high grading, that is taking the high grade trees out of high grade woodlots that used to exist, now we have much smaller concentrations of red oak. So you have these gypsy moths yet, but they're not as severe. So most of the trees that are in there at lower concentrations, it limits how many, you're not going to have an epidemic of gypsy moths all at once. So it's not as serious, but it still points up the fact that we've got a lot of problems with foreign insects and disease. Now the big thing that's going on is the emerald ash borer. And this is an English ash tree that I have in my backyard right behind my current house. And you can see where the woodpeckers are starting to go after the emerald ash borers underneath the bark, and they create these lighter patches. And if you live over in Port Crane, for example, and you're going down 369 right there by the Eagle's Nest, you could see an ash tree that's all of this type of bark. They call it blonding. And these emerald ash borers attack all kinds of ash trees. Like this is an English ash, and it's attacking that. Now, a hopeful thing has been observed in some of the places where this emerald ash borer has been epidemic. Occasionally, they've found that there are some of these trees that for one reason or other, maybe they don't taste as well. Maybe they have, I understand there's like 3 factors that repel these bugs. And they're finding that there are some trees in areas that have been completely killed. You know, in the area where I work, you know, ash is like 15–20% of the total forest. This is a big loss. And it's a major tree for lumber and also the environment. So I have to throw this in too. I was down in Pennsylvania. My wife and I, we like to go camping. I found these in Pennsylvania, these beech trees. I have never seen beech trees that nice. Of course, you know, beech is another one of those that's being crippled by several diseases. Now you have a leaf disease on top of the beech bark disease. This is down in the so-called Forest Cathedral. And I think it's along an old boundary line. A lot of civilians don't understand how people mark boundaries and how they used to do it back in the old days. This is probably an old axe blaze for the, and so is this here, and this. This is what you're looking for if you're trying to determine the boundaries of a woodlot, somebody's property. But I have never seen trees of this quality anywhere up here in New York. But I thought you'd like to see it. And it's another tree that's getting whacked severely. Then you've got that's probably, it's a little bit small, but I think you can see the white specks on the bottom of the hemlock needles. That's the hemlock woolly Adelgid. And I found this all around this area, the Waterman Conservation Center. I had a course over there a couple of years ago. Then we went out into their woods and the trees were infected at that time. That must have been at least 5 years ago. I've found it in Vestal too, which is right up the highway there on Route 17.
Waterman is injecting about 30 of those trees to see if they can save them in IBM Glen.
Right. Fortunately, these little bugs just bleed a tree slowly, and it takes a long time for them to die. And there's a lot of research going on right now to bring in a ladybug from the western part of the US, which apparently feeds on these, and there's a lot of experimentation going on. Since I've been back, I came back in March, and I was trying to catch up on some of the people that I work with, and somebody asked me to take a look at a woodlot near Sanitaria Springs, and I found an infection of hemlock in there at that time. So it's pretty widespread, but I think there's some hope here, as well as hope for the ash. Now, this is one that really scares me. It's the Asian longhorn beetle, and it bores into and kills upwards of 40 different hardwood species. And I don't know how the control efforts in Massachusetts are working right now. It's awfully difficult to exterminate an insect. They're just reproduce too much. Now, how I got into this District 7 thing with the chestnuts, I found this chestnut over near Afton, and it was 19 inches in diameter, you know, at chest height. It was premium tree. And how I found it, I didn't really find it. A logger found it, and he was harvesting in this woodlot, and he knew that I was interested in chestnuts, and he came and he refused to cut it. So I got a hold of Dave Rossi, and we ran an article on this in the Press and Sun Bulletin in 1993. And Herb Darling, who was the head of the New York chapter, apparently he got a hold of the article and he called me right away and recruited me to run District 7. So that's why I'm here. Now, this photo illustrates how few chestnuts there are. You see this white tree top down here? At the end of June, chestnut trees put out these creamy white flowers. And sometimes we used to go up and people used to donate aerial time, and we'd go look for these in the tree canopy as flowering trees, and then go after them later and try to collect nuts from them. One of the problems is most of the areas where the trees grow well and resist infection for a long time, it's a site-specific property. Where these trees occur as a scattered tree, they don't get infected fast enough, or they actually attain a larger size. And unfortunately, in those kinds of forests where they don't get infected, they occur as a single tree. And as I mentioned before, it takes two trees to tango for these. So a lot of times you'll find these trees like the one I just showed you the picture of in Afton. All it does is create blank nuts and they don't produce a seedling. It's incumbent on us to try and find these trees and propagate them if there happens to be two trees together. And these are some of my compatriots who've helped me out over the years. Mr. Natural over here, this is Jim Donowick from town of Sanford, or Windsor, I can't remember exactly, and Jay Hager. And these are the guys that would go out in the woods and they'd find trees and collect nuts. And that's how we started growing trees like these in the background here. And they also work at the plantation as a volunteer and have done a lot of this work. So we used to have the kids come up and plant. I would grow the seedlings and I would get them before they put out leaves in the spring. I'd cut them out of the ground and then we'll put them in the plantation as bare root stock. And most of these trees would come up. And that's a tree tube that they're working with right there. And you need these to protect the trees from the deer. You know, back in the days when the Indians had this land, there weren't near as many deer as there are now. This is my plant, well, another one of my planting crews, and there's Tim Connor and Roz Connor, and their daughter. This is my daughter. They we'd have planting days, and they'd come up there and plant the trees for us. This is an aerial photo of the Rogers Environmental Center over here. And this is Cush Hill Road. Actually, it starts off as, this is Route 80 right here. This is Bingham Road, goes up part the way and makes a right-hand turn, and then it becomes Cush Hill Road. And this is the chestnut plantation right here, showing some of the treetops. And the DEC put a gate there and also a sign out in the front. And there's hiking trails around here if you ever want to visit sometime. Now, I mentioned the deer. We started off with 2 or 3 foot tree tubes. And in about 2 years, the chestnut trees would grow up 3 feet and emerge from the top of the tree tube. And then the deer would come by and just munch off all the tops and retarded the growth of our trees until we started using 5 foot tubes, which is good and bad because it created a real spindly tree. We had to do something because they'd never get beyond this stage if we didn't do something. Then when the trees started getting big, we started putting them in these wire cages. But we neglected to mow the grass around the tree inside the wire cage. So the mice would be hiding from the owls and hawks, and they'd go into that grass and they just nest there, and they girdled my trees again. So we have to keep that grass down now. Now, most of the trees we planted have died back to the point where they're below ground now, but we still have some healthy trees in this plantation. Oh, I wanted to mention too, it's been a good experiment because we got about 50,000 nuts so far out of it, which have been distributed all over the place to researchers, to private people, landowners, and so forth, and they plant their trees. This is, you can get an idea of the upright nature of the chestnut tree. It grows like an ash tree. The Chinese chestnut is more like an apple tree in form. It's a low bushy tree. And I think that the Chinese made it into, they bred it that way. And so it doesn't really have the wonderful form that the American chestnut does. Now, I mentioned the trees get killed to below the ground. And then you have these trees resprouting and producing a bunch of sprouts like this. And we have to put wire cages around them because as they're resprouting, the deer come right down here and they just bite them off. So we have to put these wire cages around them now, which I mentioned before, it can be a little bit of a problem if you don't maintain them. Now, these are some researchers from ESF, and it's the woman on the bottom is Linda Poland McGugan, and the woman up here on the top is Hannah Pilkey. And what they're doing is they're bagging the flowers so that they can't be pollinated by pollen that's not what they want. You know, if you just leave them open like this, the flowers will be pollinated by the other trees in the plantation. They want to keep some of these flowers in such a condition where they can be pollinated by a drone later. And I wanted to mention too, about Linda. She's been with the with SUNY for, I guess, about 20 years. And she does a lot of the work. She's one of the most important people. Now, Hannah, Linda's been with 20 years or so. Hannah, oh, she's a newbie. She's only been there 3 years. And this is not transformed pollen. This is regular pollen. And this is Jeremy Fetzko, and he's pollinating the trees with this drone and just regular pollen. And the reason they bagged up the flowers on the preceding tree, they took the bags off when they had the drone in there and tried to experimentally pollinate the drone. This is so that we can later use this technology to pollinate singular trees. Jeremy's has a master's degree from SUNY ESF. I think they have a company now. Now, I mentioned before, there's a lot of strange things about chestnuts, and all chestnuts get this disease. And this is a European hybrid I found up in Sydney, New York. And gosh, I'm trying to think. Oh, this is Ron in the background. That's Ron Pedersen. You might have known him. He was with the National Forum on Sustainable Forestry. But this is a European chestnut hybridized with an American, and you see it still gets the disease. But European chestnuts are actually better able to cope with these infections. In fact, I want to mention at this time that they got chestnut blight in Europe too, and it was killing the trees. And then all of a sudden, these European cankers started healing up, and nobody could understand why. Well, it turned out that the blight got a virus infection so that it wasn't as deadly, and it's spreading all over Europe, and the trees are not being killed anymore because of this hypovirulent as opposed to hypervirulent strain of blight. One of the things we thought about was, hey, how can we use this? How can we use this here on our own trees? Unfortunately, this method of attenuating the chestnut blight doesn't work here in the US, because the blight here has mutated so much that you have to treat and infect every blight strain that you want to use. In other words, you would find an infection on a tree, take a sample of that blight strain, and then you could infect it manually with a virus that turns it into a hypovirulent as opposed to a hypervirulent strain. And not only that, there aren't any vectors that are moving these things around here. In other words, if I treated this canker, the next canker up the hill up here would not necessarily get the hypovirulent infection by natural means. We're the dark side of the force as far as renovating the chestnut. All the other state organizations and the national organization were fixated on crossing the Chinese chestnut with the American chestnut to get the Chinese chestnut is resistant to this blight, but it's not, it still gets the disease, but it doesn't kill the trees. But all the national organization and all the other state organizations engage themselves in creating a Chinese and American chestnut. Whereas before I even came into our chapter was founded in 1990. They immediately decided that the Chinese chestnut resistance wasn't good enough, nor was the form good enough to make a hybrid that would be very good. There are a lot of, didn't break it, did you? There are a lot of, there are probably hundreds of different hybrids with the American chestnut and the Chinese chestnut. The thing is, a lot of people are against us putting in this anti-oxidase gene into the chestnut, which I'm going to explain how that works in a minute. But anyway, when you cross the American chestnut and the Chinese chestnut, you get all these Chinese genes in the hybrid. So it's not really a native tree anymore, but they back crossed it to make it look like an American tree. But the bad thing is, these resistance genes, there's so many of them in the Chinese tree, the more you back cross it, the more these resistance genes fall out. So pretty soon you get a hybrid Chinese American tree that looks like one, but it doesn't have much resistance. So it took about 80 years for people to discard this. And for a long time, we were considered the dark side of the force because we wanted to put one gene into the chestnut. But we started working on that in 1990. And personally, I thought it was going to happen next year after I joined, which is 1993. But the technology just wasn't there. I wouldn't even tell you all the foolish attempts that we tried to get this gene inside the American chestnut. Anyway, here's how it works. This antioxidase gene recognizes oxalic acid. And what it does is it produces an enzyme which detoxifies the oxalic acid that comes about from the having the blight fungus under the bark in the tree. And it's that acid, that oxalic acid, that kills the bark. So early on, Chuck Maynard and Bill Powell, who were in charge of this project at SUNY Syracuse, recognized that the wheat rust and also other plants have this antioxidase gene in it already. In fact, this wheat is in our food supply. We wouldn't have wheat in our food supply except that this antioxidase gene enzyme, I got to make this small again so I can read it and keep on. This is already in our food supply. And we've been testing the environmental effect of having this gene in this tree, and what would it do to the environment. And these trees that we have transformed, the blight resistant is far superior to the best Chinese trees. So you have one gene in a pure American chestnut that's 99.999% pure American, except for one gene. But like the Chinese and American chestnut has a lot of Chinese genes in it. It's really not as good a substitute. And personally, the Forest Service has been doing a lot of experimentation with these Chinese American hybrids, and they're planting them outdoors on the national forests, which I'm against. I'm personally against. Other people aren't so upset about it, but these hybrid trees are going to breed with whatever residual trees you still have in the national forest. I don't like it. And I've said so. The trees in the middle contain that one gene. And what they did is they manually infected both these Qing Chinese trees and American chestnut type of tree we collected around here. And you can see the effect. It's the Qings are able to cope with it somewhat, but the American, the transformed tree is resisting the disease much better. And over here, you have an American tree without the resistance gene, and they're being killed outright. This talks about some of the testing that's being done to look at and see how does this affect tadpoles, fungi, and bumblebees. They exposed tadpoles in a puddle by using chestnut leaves mixed into that. And sounds ridiculous, but the tadpoles actually did better than they did with the oak leaves. I don't know how they did the fungi, but the bumblebees, what they did is they had transformed pollen. They exposed them to this transformed pollen and to see if the bees were going to be affected, and they were not. They were not. So we've we got these transformed trees, I want to say about 5 years ago. And we recently, they can't be released. They can't be released because it's a genetically transformed tree with one gene in it that's extra. They cannot be released until the federal government says so. I want to tell you too, the blight remains in those trees that have this control gene that nullifies the oxalic acid. It doesn't kill the fungus. The fungus is still there. It doesn't kill anything. All it does is it nullifies the effect of the oxalic acid. So it's not a pesticide. Now, last fall, we got an audience with the USDA. And we had everybody had opportunity to make comments about this transformed tree, where we want to get it, we would like to see it released now because we're convinced it's harmless. So they had a period of people submitting letters and so forth. And I guess they're still looking at it. I wanted to say too, that although I'm in favor of the release of the genetically transformed tree, I still back the fact that we have to go through this federal program of review. And we're probably going to have to go through the EPA and the Food and Drug Administration successively. So we still hope to get it released sometime in the next decade, but we know we're going to have to do a lot more work. Also, I want to tell you about our program. I said that we were giving out these nuts for people to have trees in their backyard. We're giving out nuts from our orchards. We have like 7 or 8 orchards in the state run by districts and so forth. And what we're doing is we're giving out these nuts to civilian people so they can grow the tree, grow a Native American tree in their backyard, where hopefully we can take, when the transformed trees are released, can have them plant them next to the American tree, and hopefully it'll still be bearing so they can naturally cross. Oh, one other thing I wanted to mention. I mentioned that the Chinese American hybrids don't have a good heritability of the resistance. But the transformed tree, half of the progeny from those trees are resistant, and it's heritable, it's inherited. So whereas the Chinese tree didn't work too well to carry the resistance, 50% of the offspring of these transformed trees with native trees are going to have the resistance. A few other things I forgot to mention, but probably people want to ask me questions. So we have this cash reward. We're still looking for trees. We're still looking for trees above the New York State Thruway. So does anybody want to ask any questions? Like I said, it's sort of a willy-nilly kind of presentation, but I could do it. I keep pretty much on track with the photos.
Roy, this is Jim. The fellow that gave you that photograph of the pileated woodpeckers.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Okay, well, you were mentioning beech trees. Are you familiar with the beech tree that is at the south end of the Exchange Street Bridge in Binghamton?
I'm not.
It's a
Is it a European beech?
Well, I don't know, but it's a magnificent tree.
I'll have to go take a look at it.
Yeah, it's it's not on the Park Diner side. It's on the western side of the intersection of Exchange Street and Conklin Avenue.
I know I've done quite a bit of work in Western New York. That is over in Erie County.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some real good looking trees over there. And likewise in Pennsylvania, they're more common. But it's unusual to find a good one here. And it's that's a good tree.
Roy, I live on the west side of Binghamton, and there is some kind of a chestnut tree that's just the other side of the fence behind my house. And
Uh-huh.
it's the bane of my existence. I think it's mostly dead now, but I find it doesn't have those really porcupine burrs like the one you showed in the picture. It has a green husk around the nut that is spiky, but it's green.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's not a chestnut at all.
Oh, it's not.
That's the scientific name is Asculus. And it's if you've eaten any of those nuts, they're extremely bitter. That's not a tree that is colonized by the chestnut blight.
That's horse chestnut.
Horse chestnut, that's
It's a
right.
horse. Okay,
It's
somebody said it was a
typical,
horse
typical. I
chestnut.
can remember the scientific name, can't remember the regular name.
Horse chestnut. Okay, yeah. I mean, I haven't tried to eat one, but you know,
They're sour as,
they keep
they're-
growing in my yard, and my yard is full of roots, of course, that keep sprouting. And this tree is dead, but I can't do anything about the neighbors. So, but it's badly blighted. You can see that the whole trunk is one big mass of
Uh-huh.
just where the bugs are eating.
if it doesn't have the fuzzy, I'm putting this picture back here. If it doesn't have these fuzzy little things around it, if it just has a few of them. And the Indians did eat those horse chestnuts, but they had to pound them and soak them to get the astringent acid or whatever it is in there out, because they'll poison you.
Oh,
Yeah. Oh, I wanted to mention too, that there are either 4 or 5 native chestnuts. There's the chinkapin and the Ozark chinkapin, the Florida chinkapin. There's the Ozark chinkapin is a timber tree, and I don't know too much about it. But the weird thing about this, all these trees can hybridize. They can all hybridize. And, different species, isn't it a general rule or shouldn't be a general rule, to simplify things for Roy, that if it's a different species, it shouldn't be able to hybridize, but chestnuts do. Any more questions?
Yeah, I had a couple questions, please.
Yeah,
Thanks. A lot of interesting facts, Roy.
uh-huh.
You said it's haphazard, but it was a nice haphazard. First of all, where was that cathedral of trees you talked about, where the beautiful beeches were?
It was in a state park, and I think it was Clear Lake State Park, but I can't remember the name. I can remember the grove, the specialized grove of trees that they had there that they called the Forest Cathedral. They also had some giant hemlocks there, giant. And I've been to the Heart's Content. You ever hear of Heart's Content, Pennsylvania? They got huge hemlocks
guess so.
there, and they're supposed to be fantastic. But this Forest Cathedral, and it's near the northern tier of Pennsylvania and about midpoint. I think you can look it up on the net. I think you
Probably.
can Google it. Forest Cathedral.
Okay, thanks. I had another question. Has there never been a resistant Native American tree found?
I'll tell you, that's what we're still looking for. When I found that nice 19-inch tree over in Afton, Herb Darling came over and he recruited me, and I had to take him to see that tree because I was so proud of it. He said, "No, Roy, this thing's gonna die." And just every chestnut tree, Native American chestnut tree, as far as we can tell, they all get the blight. There is some resistance in them,
Mhm.
but it's not a major resistance. Like
Yeah.
listen to this. Here's another weird thing. And I asked Dr. Powell about this. I planted some trees down at the Shenango Valley State Park too, and they're still there. And I've noticed there they hit them with lawnmowers while they were doing the grass. And I've noticed this in our plantation as well. This stimulates a little bit of resistance. And
Huh.
you knock the bark off the bottom and they get mad, and you would think that's where they'd get the blight immediately. They don't. It's strange. So there is some resistance in it, but how could we possibly harness that? And nobody's come up with a way yet. Listen, I'm thankful that I was able to give this presentation and spread what information I have. Is there anything in the chat?
Yes, there are a couple things from Kevin Millar. Kevin, are you still on?
Is there any way to cross-pollinate trees? Yes, we've done this. We did this with ladders. A couple of years ago, they found some gigantic trees near Buffalo. They were 21 and 26 inches in diameter. They put ladders up there, and they had pollen from other trees, and they manually pollinated them. And a lot of those offspring are in our plantations now. In fact, some at Sherburne. Let's see what else we got here. How many Darling 54 trees are growing at ESF? Gosh, I don't know, but I can tell you they're all inside wire fencing because they have not been. They have a lot of. I'll tell you. I have to get off a little bit. Years ago, we tried to put the gene into chestnut cells by using a microscopic cannon and a gold particle. with the genes attached to it, and we shoot those into the cell. And the success rate was like 0.00001. But we got the technology of where we can use bacteria, which the gene pollinates, piggybacks on the bacteria. And that's how we get it into the cell for now. And that's probably how it got into these other plants naturally over geologic time. Somehow, a bacterium, agrobacterium, got infected with this particular gene, and it somehow got into these other plants by that method. So it seems like it's a natural method.
Thanks. Do you know how many generations of Darling 54 are at ESF?
I can't say, but I know that they've crossed them somehow.
Okay, thanks.
I know they have.
Roy?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I've got a couple of questions. One just is what my overarching worry is climate change. So I want to ask you what you can say about how climate change is affecting North American forests and how worried you are about that in coming decades. And the second one.
Yeah, I do have something to say about that.
Okay. And the second, just a minute. The second question is, I used to know a guy at work who was in the maple sugaring business as a sideline, and there's also a problem with maple trees that they're being attacked by something. So maybe you can comment about that too. Thanks.
About the chestnuts, there's also a thing called shoestring root rot. It's a black rot that in the extreme southern portions of the chestnut range, it was killing the chestnuts down there. And the researchers are very, very concerned because it seems to be moving northward, and it might be because of the climate change, okay? And this is another thing I didn't mention, but the National now has what they call the 3-burr program, and they still want to hybridize the Chinese and American and use that in their program. Why? Because some of the Chinese clones have resistance to this black rot, this fungus that's killing the trees down south. So they're going to use that, and they're going to use the transform tree with the OXO gene, but they're also going to use the hypovirulent strains, which they'll have to customize to every tree to infect the blight fungus on trees they want to keep. And that way they can keep them for a longer period of time. But actually, the hypovirulent strains get watered down by this constant melding of fungi. You know, this fungus this stuff is from outer space. It melds, and it gradually turns it back into a hyper-virulent strain here. Now, did I forget any other aspect? Oh, I wanted to say too, for years, for 30 years, I've kept records on weather in the wintertime. I was always interested to see how many days below zero would I get here at my house. And consistently, I was getting around 20 days of below zero weather at some time during the day, consistently for each winter. And those temperatures would go, you get 10 degrees, minus 15 degrees. One time I got 32 degrees below zero. In the last 5 years, I'm just not getting the number of cold days generally. Although 2 years ago, I did get 30 days where it just barely sank below zero. But it never got really cold. I don't think it got below -5 for the whole winter. This is just, of course, this is BS as far as science. But I'm just telling you about what my experience is with measuring. Like for 20 plus years, the winters were consistent. But I just don't get the cold weather that we used to. And yes, I did have a winter about 2 or 3 years ago where there were 30 instances of where it went below zero. But I don't think it ever went below -5. I don't know what it was like this winter, but yeah, I'm concerned about it too. It's going to make a mess. It's going to make a mess in a lot of ways. Like for one thing, those hemlock woolly adelgids, they didn't even worry about them coming north until recent years, because the temperature would get to -20, it would kill them all. Now it's just not getting that cold. And now, well, not only that, if it only kills part of them, you know how insects are. If you kill off a half population, the rest of the population is more resistant to the cold. Then you got to deal with more resistant insects all the time.
So Valdi, what's your second question?
The second question was, what about sugar maples? My coworker, he produced maple syrup, and he was worried about, I forgot what type of disease it was, but something was coming after the sugar maples, and he was talking about this roughly, I'd say 20 years ago now. Can you comment on that?
I just don't have any knowledge.
Okay.
Of that.
All right. That's okay. All right. Thank you.
I just had a quick comment because in light of what you said about the Asian longhorned beetle
Yeah.
and how difficult it is to eliminate in those exotic pests, the USDA actually declared New York City clear of Asian longhorned beetle 2 years ago after New York City had fought it for about 20 odd years.
Did they say about it was clear on Long Island?
I don't know about outer Long Island. They just said New York City.
In Massachusetts, I read that they had 100,000 acres where these Asian longhorn, how are you going to clear a bug out of 100,000 acres?
Yeah.
That's why I'm scared to death of it.
They did it in New York by a lot of tree cutting, diseased
Yeah.
trees and surrounding trees, a
Yeah.
lot of public relations,
Right.
and a ban on carrying firewood.
Right. In the city, it's easier to control, but what if it gets out in the countryside?
Yeah, I know.
That's the thing.
And they like maples.
Yeah. I wanted, well, they like 39 other species too.
Yeah,
They
I
eat.
see. Yeah.
That's what's the scary part. It's not just one species.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted, at the end of this presentation, I wanted to make a pitch for more forest research, because there's scarcely a tree that we have, whether it's a commercial tree or just a tree we love. There's scarcely a single tree anymore that doesn't have something after it now. Like if we don't do anything, we're just not gonna have a forest. We've already lost most of the elms. We lost the chestnuts, and looks like we're gonna be, we might hopefully have a few ash trees which we can spread around, but it's gonna take a lot of work. And it's gonna take 100 years or more to deal with all these problems we've got. fortunately, like I said, with the chestnut, the technology has galloped. And we, you know, they've been, I say we, no, I'm not the one. These researchers have done it. But they have tools now that they didn't have 20 years ago. I mean, I can remember around 2010, I went to an annual meeting and it was just a total disaster. Everything they tried to do, you know, wouldn't work. But in the meantime, the technology has galloped ahead and it's enabled the researchers to accomplish a lot. So we're in a sense, we're living in an unfortunate time, but in a sense, we're living in a time that has, you know, we're going to have a lot of opportunities if we spend the money. And I want to say too, you know, that natural forests are the most efficient thing. You know, I mean, a plantation is great. They really, they produce, but these natural forests, you just, for the energy inputs and what you can get out of it just by managing correctly, you can't beat it. We're going to lose that. We're going to lose all that diversity, all those uses. And of course, you know, like how many people you got going to a state park on a weekend to go for a walk now? Just look at the popularity of it. And it's not going to go away. I tell you, I hope every state puts more lands aside like Florida did, because they're definitely going to need it. My friend told me that the population in Florida has tripled since I was there. I believe it. I believe it. And I'll tell you, they're getting a lot of use at the parks. So that's all I really have to say, unless somebody else has more questions.
Thank you very much. It's been a great presentation, Roy.
Okay, thanks. I hope you liked it. I hope you found it interesting.
It's terrific. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Roy. And I just wanted to add too that we didn't talk about the Western forests and Rocky Mountains, but boy, they are under threat from all kinds of insect infestation, and that's also mirrors what you said here.
What
in
about the
terms of-
climate change out there? That's what.
Yeah, and those insects that used to be they were getting killed in the more severe winters. It's not happening on a regular basis anymore. And now the drought that's really spreading. I mean, it's just awful. The fire season now almost never ends. It's almost a continuous fire season. So, I mean, this is really horrendous. So up here in the Northeast, we're still getting reasonable, you know, moisture levels, although occasionally we get a deep drought too, that we had maybe 3 or 4 years ago, where green leaves were dropping from the forest in the Ithaca region.
Oh, yeah.
So we're not in the clear by any means, but really thank you, Roy. I appreciate what you have done in your volunteer efforts, you and other people that have joined in and helped out with this. And I hope that, you know, that these resistant American chestnuts can be, you know, allowed to be grown much sooner than a decade or two. I mean, that, boy, to have to wait over a century already. I mean, we've got so many problems with other trees that, you know, this is so close. So I hope that people bring this matter up with their elected officials, and that also heed Roy's call for more research money. Forests are really important. They're great as carbon sequestration as well. So we need healthy forests for so many reasons. So again, thank you for joining us and for agreeing to do this presentation. And thanks for everybody that attended. And please pass the word again that this presentation is going to be available online, and to spread the message that our forests need help, and research needs more money. So thank you. Have a good night, everybody.
Night.